All right, here we are. How do you guys like this week's background? Just trying to switch it up a bit. Oh, hang on, something's wrong with my lighting. Give me just a second. Okay, slightly better. All right, welcome everyone back to the coding course, programming course. I believe I may have gotten some of these numbers mixed up in previous classes. It was actually week 5, but it was still showing week 4. Anyway, we're in officially week number 6 now. And this is the first class for the 6th week, which is overall class number 9. And as everyone is filing in, let's get back to the subject matter we were learning with a little bit of recap, going back a bit, reviewing a bit. Again, on the one hand, this is a crash course. It's going a little bit fast for a lot of information, but on the other hand, we really do believe it's possible to get a good taste of what's going on here and what we're dealing with, and just really by following through, paying attention, and hopefully not losing any of the classes, so that we can go back and review any videos as needed. It should be feasible to follow along and figure things out, especially by practicing a lot what we're learning, exercising it a lot, reviewing it, testing it with the freecodecamp.org tests over there. And finally, just a second here. Okay. Okay. So let me open up my coding editor over here. Here we have our web page we were playing around with up until recently. This is the Deals website that we're trying to imitate. Let me just open up the actual original Top Baby Deal. I think, is that what it was? topbabydeal.com. Yep, that's the right one. This is the web page we're trying to imitate. And we've already learned a bunch of the different technologies involved with this. It's interesting that to make a web page, it's really a combination of multiple different technologies. We have HTML, which is a markup language to give the structure to the page. We need CSS, which is not a markup language. It's not really a programming language either. It's really just a way how to style the HTML that you wrote and give it some specifics of appearance and color and size and stuff like that. And then we move on to JavaScript, which gives life to our web page. It makes things move and change around and do different things and activities and movements and stuff that we want should happen throughout the lifetime of a person browsing on this page. And eventually, hopefully, if we get around to it, we're going to learn also how this all connects to the website server that lives somewhere on the internet. Because right now we've been playing around with websites that exist on our own machine, on our own computer locally, and files saved on our computer that we opened up in the browser, and we connected one with another. You know, we linked in the CSS into the HTML, we linked in the JavaScript into the HTML, and that's how we got things to work all together in the browser. But ultimately, we have to learn how to set this up on the internet and what goes on the internet. What kind of magic thing is this thing when you put a website on the internet? And how it's really not that mysterious and magic, and we'll learn about that eventually. But now let's get back to a little bit more of what we learned with the JavaScript programming language to make things move and change around in the browser, specifically by using the jQuery library. I was in the middle of saying that on the one hand, this is a crash course to go through a lot of material quickly, but on the other hand, by following through with it, you should be able to follow along. And there is, it is possible to follow along and to learn all the different technologies possible to do, especially by exercising a lot. Give me just a second here. Sorry about that. Okay, we're back here. So let's recap a little bit more the rest of what we learned about JavaScript and how that connects with jQuery and how finally that helps us play around and change things and make things happen in the web page. So even though it's a lot to learn, and I recognize that in the past class or two, we kind of went a little bit fast. There was a lot of information that we were learning, packing in real quickly. We went straight from some basic variables. We jumped right into loops and functions, passing stuff into functions, returning stuff out of functions. And then we quickly went into arrays and objects with properties. And so let's just go back a little bit and recap, go a little bit further with jQuery programming. And finally, when we're comfortable a little bit more and exercising and we know what else to play around with to make our web page come alive, hopefully there on in, we're going to start looking into what's behind the scenes with all this, the back end of the website that lives on the server and how we connect to that, how we get actual information, actual data, actual images for our deals. So for now, let's continue a little bit more of JavaScript and jQuery. So last time, if you remember, we set up this page where we have A, B, C, and D, and using jQuery, after I click OK on this alert, it actually changed some things in my page. And right now it looks pretty coarse and pretty basic and pretty bland, it just immediately just switched from one to the other. But with jQuery, you can do so much more. You can do smooth animations that it comes from one, it goes into the other. You could, by clicking of a button, it moves things around. You can select and drag one to the other. You can select choices. You can make things happen as a result of other things happening, etc., etc. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do. So let's explore a little bit more of that, applying the ideas that we learned from variables and arrays and loops and functions. From all those things that we learned before about basic JavaScript, now we're going to learn a little bit what happens with them in jQuery when we play around with it on our web page. So let's go over here real quick. And let's, here, how about we look at one of these. Okay, first of all, here's the freecodecamp.org section on learning jQuery. I would highly recommend you guys go through here to learn in more detail specific exercises, such as how to use jQuery to pick something out of the page, like I want to mess around with this piece over here, or I want to take this one and I want to move it to there, or whatever it is. And with going through these exercises one by one, it actually will give you a little example. Here's a page, here's a bunch of stuff that's inside the page. Now you go ahead with jQuery, call this function, do this and this and that and the other with it, and suddenly you'll see it's going to have this magic effect, that magic effect, the other magic effect, etc., etc. So please be sure to go through some of these lessons over here. Oops, this is actually Bootstrap. Sorry about that. I'm talking about jQuery here. Here we go. Here we go. Some examples of how you can mess around and make cool things happen in your website using jQuery. So let's go back to our page and let's play around with some other things. Let's say that in some situations throughout people using your page, this text has to change. Let's say to begin with, when people land on the page, it should say top deals from around the web ranked. And then later on, if they click a certain button or if they stay on the page for a certain amount of time or something like that, Then you want it to change to another message, maybe something else entirely, or another slogan, another catchphrase or something. So how can we change the text of an element? Let's go into JavaScript and give it a whirl. So I'm going to start off by emptying out all of this stuff over here. And what I'm left with here is with the base thing that we had last time when starting to use jQuery, which is basically just amounts to the idea that, let's write it in a comment over here. When the page is loaded and ready, then start doing this jQuery stuff. And just to prove it, let's make an alert over here. And this is going to happen whenever the page is not necessarily fully loaded yet. And here, we're going to make an alert when officially the page is now fully loaded and ready. And even if I take this whole part over here and I put it earlier in my code, as you guys are probably already familiar with, what I did here is I made something that's going to be prepared and ready, but it's not going to happen yet. It's going to happen later at a certain later time. This stuff, however, is at the ground floor, so to speak, in our code over here, and therefore it's going to ideally execute right away. So what happens is when the browser gets this HTML page and wants to start doing it, wants to start showing this page, it's going to go line by line, piece by piece, and try to execute and understand every part of what's going on here. And then it comes here and it says, oh yeah, I'm going to go get jQuery. Okay, we got the jQuery JavaScript in our browser, so now we have that available to use. And then it's going to go here and say, oh, let's go get main.js. And that's our custom JavaScript file that we wrote over here. We created this one ourselves. So the page is technically still loading, right? We're still in the middle of reading the HTML of the page and kind of doing them one by one, line by line. There could even be that there's a lot more code going on here after this, for some reason or other. There's other stuff happening here. In fact, it's possible that this script tag happens somewhere else. Right now, we put it, as is sometimes advised, to do at the bottom of the body tag, right inside before the end of the body tag. But we could also as well have put this on top of the body tag. We could have even put it inside of the head tag. The script tag is a little bit versatile like that. You can actually put it in a bunch of different places, and they both might be equally as valid. So if, let's say, we load it up over here for some reason, because we want to load up our JavaScript files earlier in our page, meanwhile, we haven't finished even loading up the rest of our page either. So let's give this a little test over here. I'm going to make a little extra script tag over here. And I'm going to say alert in middle of the page. So smack in middle of my HTML document, I open up a script tag and I started doing some JavaScript, just right in the middle of nowhere, just like that, just for fun. And in theory, I'm not sure if this is actually going to work out this way. In theory, what's going to happen is the browser is going to try loading up the page piece by piece, line by line. First, it's going to get the main.js, and it's going to do whatever is going on inside there. So it's going to alert this and say, the page is not necessarily fully loaded yet, and so that's why this part over here is not going to execute yet. Then, to prove that, it's going to go further down the page, and it's going to do things line by line, piece by piece, and at this point, it's going to make an alert, and I wonder if we might even see in the browser that only the top bar of the page is showing, and the rest of the code is not showing yet. The deals are not showing it, but I'm not sure that's actually how it works. Sometimes the browser does some funky things. It runs ahead and it does all the HTML first, and then it goes back and it does all the JavaScript parts later. It could do a bunch of different things in a bunch of different orders, but let's see if this might give us an exact representation of what we're expecting it to do. So I'm going to refresh this page over here to show why it's important to have this part over here that says jQuery, only start doing your thing once the page is fully loaded and ready. because the page might not even have all the elements, all the stuff ready that we're going to be working with. So let's refresh this page. Now, the first thing that we got is the page is not necessarily fully loaded yet. And that makes sense because at the beginning, way on top of our HTML page, we loaded in our JavaScript. It went over there. It read this thing line by line by line. This we're not going to run yet. This is for a later time. And then we have an alert that says the page is not necessarily fully loaded yet, which is true because we're still on top over here. We haven't even fully went through the whole page yet. Now, let's see what's happening next. By the way, notice that the page is empty. None of the HTML stuff has loaded yet. I'm going to click OK. Okay, so yeah, the page is still empty, actually, even though we're already at the point in the page where this should have been showing already. But it isn't, because the browser can do some funky things like that sometimes. It's not exactly perfect what's before and what's after when it comes to HTML and script tags. But now we're allegedly in the middle of loading the page. You know, the browser is still going through, running through everything and trying to execute all of this HTML as it's supposed to be. So we're in the middle of the page now. And finally, I'm going to click OK. Now we're seeing that all the stuff has actually loaded. The entire page is showing. All the rest of the HTML has done its thing. And finally, we come to a point in time where the page realizes, hey, I'm done. I'm fully ready. I'm fully ready to execute. And that's when this part over here starts happening. This is a function that gets called at that point in time because of this line of code that we wrote here, which means, oh, now this comment is not in the right place. This comment should belong right on top of where it's supposed to be explaining. So when the page is loaded and ready, then start doing this jQuery stuff. And that's the alert that we found at the end after everything finished loading. Then we have that now the page is fully loaded and ready. So now we want to show that once the page is ready and you're sure that you have all of your HTML and everything is loaded, now what did we want to do? I think we wanted to change the text of this stuff over here. How do we do that? Give me just a minute. Sorry about that again. Back into business over here. Let's go to this over here. Let's inspect the element real quick and examine which element it is that we're dealing with. Pull this down so we could see the rest of the inspector over here because I'm only seeing the CSS and I'm not seeing the elements. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're in the H2. So in jQuery now, I want to grab that H2. How do I grab that H2? So if you guys remember, we can use the dollar symbol, and the dollar symbol is going to work a little bit like CSS in here inside of a string. This is really a function that's called jQuery, but we can abbreviate with an abbreviation. We can actually call it by its shorthand name, dollar symbol. But we're basically calling a function and saying, I'm going to give you a string.
I was getting reports that people couldn't see your screen. Can they see it now?
A good question.
I can't see your VS Code, so I think you're only sharing one window, I think.
Hang on just a minute. Oh, you might be very right about that. I am so sorry. I might have been rambling on for a full 20 minutes here and not noticed that they cannot see the rest of the screen. I'm really sorry about that. Let's backtrack and go back to where we're supposed to. All right, guys, I'm really, really sorry about that. This means we have to backtrack and go at this again because everything I've been talking about, you guys were not able to see what I was saying. So I'm going to quickly recap over here. Okay, so we have our HTML file, and in the HTML file, we have a bunch of stuff that we typed up, all of the HTML over here. And we have also these little script tags over here, which is supposed to pull in the jQuery, the JavaScript, that we want to be working with to have JavaScript in our page. Here's an example of what the website looks like. If you guys remember, just a second here.